Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Raisa Cetra, who is the co-executive director of Article 19 Brazil and South America, and a PhD student in global health at the University of São Paulo. She has a bachelor's degree in international relations from the same university. She has worked widely on international human rights law within civil society organizations, mostly in Brazil and Argentina, and in regional and global fora, such as the United Nations, the Inter-American Human Rights System, and Mercosur. Nationally, Raisa has extensive experience with the development of public policies that internalize human rights standards on topics such as immigration, democracy, and freedom of expression. So, Raisa, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Hi, James. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you all.
So you are affiliated to Article 19, an NGO founded in London and present in Brazil since 2007. Could you tell us a little about Article 19's work and its activism?
Yeah, of course. Article 19 is a global NGO dedicated to protect freedom of expression in a broader comprehension. So we mostly focus on freedom of press, freedom of association, and digital rights, and access to information. Those are our four main topics of work. But specifically in Brazil, we were founded during a decade that we were working to strengthen democracy, and especially to strengthen the basis of democracy, legal and normative rights, and how we could expand the fundamental rights that we had established in our constitutions in 1988. So Article 19 came to Brazil especially to strengthen freedom of expression in law and in practice in a young democracy as Brazil. And this is also related with the South America history, no? Because South America has a dictatorship history. So I would say that in our main focus also in the region is to strengthen democracy, those pillars of democracy, and especially thinking of our past and how we should strengthen it to not repeat it. So I would say that this is our main objective.
So Article 19 has published a report recently called The Right to Information, Memory, and Truth. Could you explain what was the focus of this report?
Yeah, of course. It's totally related with the reason we came to Brazil. But it is a kind of an updated vision of memory, truth, and justice, especially because our main action, our first action once we came to Brazil was to fight, and finally we got it, for a Freedom of Expression Act. A Freedom of Information Act, sorry. So this was for years and years our main action here. And we got it. We have a very good law, an example of a FOI, and we had Bolsonaro. No, we had another time of authoritarianism here in Brazil. Instead, and when I say I say the Brazilian civil society. We tried our best to strengthen our democracy for more than 20 years, but unfortunately it wasn't enough, and we had another time of authoritarianism here. We could say 6 years of authoritarianism, and we thought that it would be a good opportunity to talk about freedom of access to information, right? Memory, truth, and justice, and how we could connect our dictatorship past, our colonial past, racism, and our territorial problems to this new moment of authoritarianism. So the main objective of the report is to explain how access to information is a key component of democracy, and how the violations of this right is related with violence, state violence, neither in democracy times when we think about racism, or also when we think on our authoritarian period as it was Bolsonaro. So this was our objective, to take this, this traditional discussion in South America, which is memory, truth, and justice, and put it in perspective, historical perspective, and also an updated perspective, thinking of these new forms of authoritarianism that we are facing in the global, no?
So one of your research themes is the issue of artistic freedom. You argue that today censorship is carried out not by banning works, but by judicial means. Could you give us an overview of this scenario?
Yeah, we realize it. Of course, we have always knew that the artist and the cultural world was a key piece for democracy, and artists are always in the front of the resistance and questioning the establishment and the status quo. But during Bolsonaro time here in Brazil, we realized that his government, or the far right movement, chose artists and our traditional culture as an internal enemy. So during the dictatorship, artists were also persecuted, but in a more traditional way of seeing censorship. They couldn't publish a book, they couldn't show artist exhibition. But now, during last years, what we saw, it was a more sophisticated way to conduct a censorship. So not only the judiciary come into the scene and say things like, these artists cannot perform because doing this, they are going against freedom of religion, for example, or child's right. So we saw a sophisticated way using fundamental rights. The judiciary used fundamental rights to justify censorship, but also a bureaucratic way of prohibiting artist expression. Like, we have here a big amount of public policies that promote artistic freedom of expression, and those policies started with some barriers, like pieces that promote LGBT rights cannot be in the center of this public policy. So we saw either the judiciary, but also a bureaucratic way of prohibiting artistic freedom of expression, persecuting artists. So it was a very sophisticated way to do censorship, to violate artistic freedom of expression.
Can you give a specific example that might allow our listeners to understand more the situation?
Yeah, of course. We had, I think it was almost, if it wasn't the first case, it was like the the fifth case. We had here in Brazil a judge prohibited a play that it had in the center of the play a trans woman representing judges, and the judge decided that this performance was against religious freedom in Brazil, because it would put in danger traditional religion symbols. So it was a way to decide how people should think about Jesus, and also it used religious freedom to prohibit a play. Another example, this play was called Evangelho segundo Jesus Cristo, and we had another
which would be the gospel according to Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Another example was a big festival that we had here called Capão Festival, that couldn't access funding because the festival called itself as an anti-fascist festival. And the executive that was responsible for this funding said that this kind of position was a political position, and artist expressions with political positions were not allowed here. So those are two examples. We had another big one, the Marighella movie. Marighella was an activist here in Brazil, very important for the resistance of our last dictatorship. And his biography, his film, his movie that was put in place during the pandemic could not also be presented to the public due to financial barriers. Like the executive argued that the producers did not present right well the accountability of the project. So
the financial records were not in order.
Exactly, the financial records were not in order. So the executive decided to not allow the movie to come, and those three examples show how sophisticated it is actually, because we still have some kinds of censorship going ahead now, even with the new government. So I would stay with those three examples.
So you recently were in Washington, D.C. with a delegation organized by several organizations, including the Washington Brazil office. Could you talk about that trip? What was the purpose of the trip? What did you do? Did you think you accomplished?
During those years that we saw artistic freedom of expression violations, we realized that we don't have, neither in Brazil, neither in the region, a strong mechanism for the protection of artists and the protection of cultural rights. We have some standards that we could use related to freedom of expression and also related with cultural rights, but we do not have specific and strong standards on artistic freedom of expression and cultural rights. So we decided together with some partners that we would promote the adoption of Inter-American principles on artistic freedom of expression. And this trip was the main objective of the trip was to put the Inter-American Commission and civil society and also some states representatives together to talk about artistic freedom of expression and how the region is in this topic, and not only Brazil but the region, and talk about how we should work to have those principles adopted by the Inter-American Commission. So it was a good step. We had a very good reception from the Commission. We had 2 special rapporteurs during all the events. We have the Executive Secretariat of the Commission there. We had 2 commissioners there. So we got a very strong commitment of the Commission to those principles. So it was a very, very important step to have this gap solved.
So in the United States, there is a strong notion of freedom of speech, which is subject to ongoing debates about its limits, even if it should have limits. And the US Constitution's First Amendment is frequently cited as an example, a paradigm. What is your view about the limits of freedom of speech in a country like Brazil?
Yeah, this discussion is in the order of the day now. And for us, as a freedom of expression organization, it's quite complicated to talk about the limits of the freedom of expression, but we are pretty sure that we can talk about it, and we should talk about it always when historically marginalized groups are in danger. I mean, we can talk about the limits of freedom of expression if we are talking about protecting freedom of expression of historically marginalized groups. I mean, those 2 things must be connected. We should not talk about limiting freedom of expression if we are talking about protecting authorities or protecting judges or protecting the president, because we know that this kind of limits would put in risk and dangers the political thought of the population. But in a country where we have racism, historically racism, where we have systematic violations against indigenous people, we know that sometimes we need to regulate freedom of expression if this is going to protect those groups. So this is related with some part, not all, of hate speech, for example. But not all types of hate speech, this is specific type. And we lived Bolsonaro, we lived this new form of authoritarianism in the same way that you experience the Trump administration. And we know that the basis of this kind of power is the disinformation, the misinformation, fake news, and massive hate speech. So it's important to think on regulate freedom of expression, but we are pretty convinced that the content regulation is the last resort that we have. It shouldn't be our prior measure to combat authoritarianism. We should have another kind of mechanism to do so. For example, economic regulation of platforms. We should go to the business model of this kind of place where freedom of expression exists. So it's pretty dangerous to regulate content, to regulate what people are saying. We should look to other kinds of forms to regulate freedom of expression, but not put in danger our freedom of expression, because we know that indigenous people, Black people, women are historically censored. No, so we have to balance this.
But so how do you tackle disinformation in the age of social media and TikTok? It seems that legislators and platforms are always one step behind. What do we do concretely?
Yeah, we have two kinds of proposals to this problem. Of course, we need to think together. I think it's a ongoing problem, and we need to come together as civil society, as states, and think on solutions. But we are pretty convinced that as Article 19 at the whole world, I mean, this is a position of Article 19, not only in Brazil, that controlling and putting some barriers to the business model of the platforms, because they get money with this disinformation, massive disinformation phenomenon. They got money on due to this. So we should attack the money and not the content itself. We should.
Well, what does that mean exactly? I want to understand what that means exactly, to attack the money and not the content. How do you do that?
So you are not
on what basis do you contact the money?
So you are not going to take, like, James public some sentence in the Twitter, and our proposal is not, and this sentence get circulating, and suddenly it's a fake news and it's circulating in all places. What we defend is we should not focus on take this content out of the platforms. This shouldn't we should not focus on this. We should focus on the platform put this sentence to be this massive disinformation, because they work with a business model that gave money to them once people click on your sentence. So we should block and put some barriers to this kind of way of getting money. So platforms should not have this incentive of, okay, I do not care about the content, I just care about the clicks. But the clicks are generating money for it. So we should put rules on how the money will be generated within the click system and not the content. So taking a content of an online platform, it's like you will need to take a lot of content. So you need to have a big system of controlling and people being watched. But if we go and look for and regulate the platform and how the platform work, it would be more efficient than taking content with the risk. And of course, if we focus on taking the content, the platform will do this. And we are going to give the platform more power than they have now, because they are going to be allowed to take or not take a content. So this kind of proposal that focus only on moderating the content of a publication face two risks: giving more power to platforms and not being able to solve the problem as a systematic problem. It's not only a problem related to one person or one content. It's a systematic problem. So we need to face it as a systemic, with a systemic solution, and not only with individual solutions. This is our main.
So after the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C., Twitter took Trump off of its social media site. And now Elon Musk, who bought Twitter, is arguing that there needs to be absolute freedom of expression, and therefore Trump is welcome back to Twitter. Although or to X, I don't think he's really much there because he has his own platform now, Truth Social. Do you think that's the right approach, is to actually prohibit people from being on the media? Would it be appropriate for the Brazilian government to prohibit Jair Bolsonaro from posting on X, or his sons when they post hate speech and fake news? What do we do about that?
When we are talking about public authorities, we need to be more. We need to regulate more what they say, because they are public authorities. So it's quite different monitoring the content that Bolsonaro public. It's different of monitoring the content that my aunt is publishing, you know. So for sure, we need to think about strong measures when public authorities disseminate a lie, disseminate a hate speech. For sure, we should face it. But we need to start to put things in their right box. So we are talking about regulating an account of a public authority. Not necessarily we are talking about regulating all accounts. So it's a very, very complex discussion that we shouldn't have just one solution. No? And for us, for example, another kind of solution that we should be thinking, I mean, we should regulate freedom of expression, and we have some ways to doing so without putting in risk our freedom of expression in general. But we also should think on promoting freedom of expression as a measure to face those new problems. So for us at Article 19, the democratization of freedom of expression and the democratization of the communication system it's a very, very important discussion to have in this case as well. For example, how people keeping asking us, how we control disinformation? Okay, so researchers say that people that identifying a disinformation and publishing counter information about this same information is not efficient. We are not going to achieve the same amount of people, but we can generate our own information and circulate it in a broader way. So popular communication, it's quite important. Democratize access to internet is also important to promote people that they can produce their own information and have their methods of communication. It's another way to promote it. In Brazil, we lost this discussion. The state lost the control and lost a lot of opportunities to have communities together in promoting a good and healthy communication system. Now we are in hands of the private sector that work in this way that we were talking about. So it's small business of communications are not promoted here. So we are not going to have another system that could face this model. So we should think about regulating freedom of expression as a measure to preventing us of having this kind of situation that we had in Brazil and in the United States, but we also should think about other measures that promote freedom of expression that also protect us.
Very good. So In 2018 and 2022, combating misinformation and fake news was one of the biggest challenges in Brazil. How do these challenges present themselves for the next local elections in Brazil next year?
Oh, we have two kinds of challenges. One is during last elections, the presidential elections, we had a lot of decisions, judicial decisions that regulated content and regulated disinformation during elections. Those normatives should also be in place now, but we need to think carefully about their limits also. So we have this challenge of taking our experiences during last elections, the national elections, and using it to promote a safe election in the local level as well. This is one challenge, but the other is, once we had our democracy back, we should look to those normatives with some more carefully. Do they put in risk the freedom of expression at some point? What should we change to those regulations now that we have another situation? So we have those two challenges. Using our past experience to these elections, but also being able to think with more time now. No, you are in a extraordinary moment, last elections. Now we had more time, more capacity to think with rights in our mind.
So optimistic about the future or pessimistic?
I'm always pessimist. I work with human rights, so but no, I think that we are moving forward. We are with a new government here in Brazil that is trying a lot to put things correctly again, but it's hard because the conservative movement and the far-right movement is inside the society. They are not now in our executive power anymore, but they are in local executives. They are very, very strong in our Congress and Senate. So they are still here, and in some way we are so afraid of that they can come back, that we are not pushing this government how we should do. So in this sense I am both optimist and pessimist. I think if we are able to organize the movement, the human rights movement, social movement, to pressure this government to be more progressive, we are going to get in a good place. If we stay the way that we are now, with thinking on how if I make a critic to this government, I will let stronger the far-right movement, we are not going to get there, because the government will not have the support to try stronger measures, and they are going to be there more time that we would like to.
One last question. Why is your organization named Article 19? What is Article 19?
Article 19 is the article inside the Universal Declaration that guarantees freedom of expression, access to information right, the protest right. So it's our main guide.
I want to thank you so much, Raisa, for joining us on Brazil Unfiltered today. It was really an honor to have you with us.
Oh, I thank you very much. It was a great opportunity. We need to strengthen those discussions because Brazil and the United States have a lot to think about last years.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.